Hello, Professor, TA, and classmates. This is our economics final video presentation. Our group members are Shirgrain Prudent, Emily Cano, Uber Contreras, Andrew Usman, and Montserrat Lopez. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello everyone. So I am going to discuss the question one on the presentation. So the passage on question one, it said that the United States have suffered from inflation problems since 2023. Therefore, it has continued to increase the interest rate. The federal funds rate has been between 5.25% to 5.5% since July 2023. In early 2024, Taiwan also suffered from an inflation problem. Therefore, Central Bank of Taiwan unexpectedly increased its key discount rate to 2% in March. The Japanese economy, which has faced deflationary pressures, has seen indications of healthy inflation in recent months. As a result, the Bank of Japan raised interest rate to 0.05% in March 2024, ending the country's historic era of negative interest rates. There has been a big gap in interest rate between USA and Asian countries such as Japan and Taiwan. Therefore, there has been capital inflow from Asian countries to USA, and net capital outflow of USA has been decreased. As a result, US dollars have been appreciated, while Japanese yen and new Taiwan dollars have been depreciated. On April 29, the nominal exchange rate once went up to 160 Japanese yen per US dollars. However, Central Bank of Japan tried to intervene foreign currency exchange market in Tokyo on that day. As a result of intervention, the nominal exchange rate went down to 155 Japanese yen per US dollar in the end of that day. So the first question is, let's discuss what is federal funds rate and why has federal funds rate been capped at a very high level, which is at 5.25% to 5.5% in the United States. So the federal funds rate is the interest rate at which banks lend to another bank, and they keep it at a very high level to reduce the inflation that they have been facing. And the second question is, what is discount rate? Why did Central Bank of Taiwan increase its discount rate to deal with the inflation problem in March? So similar as the federal funds rate, the discount rate is the rate at which the central bank lends to bank as a lender of last resort. And they increase the discount rate to reduce the money supply, which ultimately to reduce inflation. So the next question is, what is real exchange rate? And please use the open macroeconomy model to explain why capital flows have caused the real exchange rate to rise in USA. Graphical analysis is required. So, real exchange rate is the rate at which a person can trade the goods and services of one country for the goods and services of another. The real exchange rate compares the price of domestic goods and foreign goods in the domestic economy. So this is the graph. And firstly, let me explain that the demand for market for loanable fund, it consists of investment and net capital outflow. And then here, the market for net capital outflow, this, of course, this is net capital outflow. And the supply for the market for foreign currency exchange, it is consists of net capital outflow. And when it has been said in the question, US net capital outflow decreased. So first, we need to move the demand in the market for loanable funds to the left, it shifts to the left, as well as the net capital outflow, it will shift to the left. And then from here, we can find that the new interest rate, which is R2, is lower than the original interest rate. And moving on to the market for foreign currency exchange, because that the interest rate is lower than before, it means that the supply side for market for foreign currency exchange, which is the net capital outflow, it will shift to the left because it has been decreased. And as a result, from this, the real exchange rate, it increased from E1 to E2. And the next question is, what is nominal exchange rate? Draw a diagram for Tokyo's foreign currency exchange market. And on this diagram, the vertical axis is Japanese yen per US dollar, whereas the horizontal axis is quantity of US dollars. Identify factors affecting the demand curve and supply curve on this diagram. So, a nominal exchange rate is the rate at which a person can trade the currency of one country to the for the currency of another. So this is the graph of the nominal exchange rate. The vertical axis is Japanese yen per US dollars, and the horizontal axis is the quantity of US dollars. Now, supply is basically those who will supply the US dollars, and usually the capital outflow and export is the supply, and the demand for the US dollars is basically capital outflow and imports. So suppose that the initial equilibrium nominal exchange rate was 150 Japanese yen per US dollars on April 28. So why continuous capital outflow from Japan caused nominal exchange rate to rise to 160 Japanese yen per US dollars on April 29? Explain how Central Bank of Japan pulled the nominal exchange rate down to 155 Japanese yen per US dollars in the end of that day. Graphical analysis is required. So firstly, let us discuss how continuous capital outflow from Japan caused nominal exchange rate to rise to 160 Japanese yen per US dollars on April 29. So continuous capital outflow causes the demand curve to shift to the right. As I have mentioned, here capital outflow is the demand for the market, nominal exchange market. So when there is a continuous capital outflow increases, it means that the demand will shift to the right, causing the Japanese yen per US dollars going from 150 to 160. And the second part of the question is how did the Central Bank of Japan intervene this phenomenon? Yeah, so to intervene, the Central Bank of Japan, they would sell US dollars and buy Japanese yen in the exchange market. So in the graph, because the Central Bank of Japan, it sells the US dollars, so basically the supply for US dollars, it will increase, and therefore the supply curve of this on this diagram will shift to the right. So the Japanese yen per US dollars, it went from 160 and 155 because the supply side is shifted to the right.
Good day, everyone. I am Shekwin Prudent, and today I will be presenting question number 2. So question number 2 essentially states that China has experienced a fast economic growth since it opened the door to the world. The real estate sector has contributed to China's GDP significantly. However, since 2019, China's economy has suffered from threats of several black swans. First, there has been trade war between USA and China. Second, foreign companies have continued to leave China since the COVID-19 pandemic period. Third, China has been experiencing a real estate crisis with the collapse of giants like Evergrande and Country Garden. Lastly, China's stock market hits new 5-year low. So question 2.1 essentially asks, how can trade war between USA and China influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. So basically, it could reduce the net export, investment, and consumption. And the general effect on aggregate demand is depicted in this particular graph. As you can see that the aggregate demand curve shifts from 81 to 82, signifying a decrease in total aggregate demand within China's economy. So to further break down exports, investment, and consumption, I'll give you a brief elaboration. So as it pertains to exports, tariffs and trade barriers imposed by the US reduces China's exports, directly lowering net export component of aggregate demand. As it pertains to investment, the trade war's uncertainty may lead to lower foreign direct investment and domestic investment as firms become concerned about future economic conditions. And lastly, consumption. Overall economic uncertainty can reduce consumer confidence, resulting in lower spending. Question 2.2. How can the leaving of foreign companies influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. So, in a nutshell, it could reduce the investment. So, aggregate demand curve would shift to the left. And this is also illustrated as we can see that the aggregate demand curve, 81, shifts from 81 to 82. To give you more insight, so when it comes to investment, decreased foreign direct investment generally lowers aggregate demand. Question 2.3. How can real estate crisis influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. So basically, a real estate crisis can affect aggregate demand. And to just give you some more insight, once you have a real estate crisis in an economy, that definitely has an impact on aggregate demand. So you could reduce the investment because the real estate sector is a significant part of China's investment. So as illustrated in this graph, the aggregate demand curve would shift to the left. And we see that as there's a shift from 81 to 82. Question 4. How can stock market crash influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. So a stock market crash affects aggregate demand through several channels. And here we've generalized it and we've stated that it could reduce the consumption. So the aggregate demand curve would shift to the left. And we see that from 81 to 82. But if a further elaboration, we have what you call the wealth effect. So falling stock prices reduces household wealth, resulting in lower consumer spending. This is investment. Lower stock prices can limit firms' ability to raise capital, resulting in decreased investment. And consumer and business confidence, a stock market crash can erode confidence, resulting in decreased spending and investment. So question 5 asks to use appropriate models to analyze the impacts of these black swans on China's real GDP and overall price in the short run and in the long run. So here, in this graph, we can see that the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left from 81 to 82. And we can also see that the short run aggregate supply shifts from SRAS1 to SRAS2, which signifies an increase. And here we see the price level, it reduces from P1 to P2 to P3. So the short run real GDP decreases, and as a result, price level also decreases. And in the long run, real GDP equals the natural rate of output, so price level further decreases. I now move on to 2.6, and 2.6 asks, what would you suggest the Chinese government to do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans? Explain your reasoning. So since the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans has caused the AD curve to shift to the left, the government can offset this effect by 1, increasing government purchase, 2, cut the general income taxes, and 3, apply some automatic stabilizer. We can do that in the form of progressive income tax system, lower income assistance, or unemployment compensation. And we see here in this graph that the aggregate demand has shifted from 81 to 82, and now we're trying to offset this particular result that has occurred as a result of what has transpired. But just to give you an elaboration on the 3 points. So basically the fiscal policy. And when the government increases spending, we call that stimulus spending. To increase government spending on infrastructure projects to boost aggregate demand, cut the personal income taxes, so tax cuts. Implement temporary tax cuts for households and businesses to boost disposable income and encourage spending and investment. And I now move on to question 2.7. Question 2.7 essentially asks, what would you suggest Central Bank of China to do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans? So since the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans has caused the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left, the Central Bank of China can offset these effects by 1, increasing the money supply. So here's what happens when the money supply is increased. So increasing the money supply so that the interest rate will fall. And we can see this here, that the interest rate has decreased or has reduced from R1 to R2 as a result of the increase in the money supply from MS1 to MS2. And this will cause an increase in the investment and ultimately shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. 2, there's what we call quantitative easing. And I will give you a general idea of what this means. So to increase financial system liquidity, implement quantitative easing by purchasing government and corporate bonds. So through this, you will have more revenue uh, being passed on and generated within China's economy. And lastly, we have what you call the reserve requirements. And that's how the reserve requirements can impact the short-run economic fluctuations. So lowering the bank reserve requirements will, as a result, encourage lending. And as a result, this will offset the short-run economic fluctuations caused by this black swan. Thank you.
Hi, today I'll be presenting on question 3 for the final video presentation of economics. So the following question states, following Russian invasion of Ukraine, the European Union adopted a number of sanctions in an attempt to immobilize the war effort. One sanction was a complete import ban on all Russian seaboard crude oil and petroleum products. This sanction sent energy prices to historic high. So let's check the following five questions of this scenario. So we're going to start with question 1, which says use a graph energy market. Sorry, of energy market to explain why the sanction caused the energy price to rise sharply. So the import ban on Russian energy increased scarcity, shifting supply leftward, raising prices. So on this graph, we have the prices level on the vertical axis and the quantity output, which is usually on the horizontal axis. Initially, the market is in equilibrium at price level P1 and output Q1, where the aggregate demand curve, which is AD1, intersects the short-run aggregate supply curve, which is SRAS1. However, an important ban on Russian energy introduces a significant change. This sanction increases scarcity in the energy market as a substantial source of energy supply is suddenly removed. As a result, the short-term aggregate supply curve shifts leftward from SRAS1, which is the short-term aggregate supply curve 1, to the short-term aggregate supply curve 2. The new intersection points between the AD from the AD curve and the SRAS2 curve is at a higher price level, which is P2, and a lower output level than before. This shift illustrates that with reduced energy supplies, prices increase from P1 to P2, reflecting the higher cost of scarcer energy resources. Now we're going to question 2. How could this sanction affect overall price in the European Union in the short run? Output, unemployment, graphical and descriptive analysis are required. So there will be inflation, decrease in output, and increase in unemployment. So on this graph, we have the price level on the vertical axis and the quantity of output with GDP on the horizontal axis. Initially, the economy is in equilibrium at price level P1 and output level Q1, where the aggregate demand curve intersects the short-run aggregate supply curve. With the sanction in place, the European Union faced a reduction in energy supply. This scarcity causes the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift leftward from short-run aggregate supply 1 to short-run aggregate supply 2. The new equilibrium is now at a higher price level P2 and a lower level output Q2. So let's break it down. So the inflation, the leftward shift from the short-term average supply curve leads to an increase in the overall price level from P1 to P2. This rise in price is known as inflation, driven by the increased cost of scarce energy resources. Decrease in output. As the new equilibrium moves from Q1 to Q2, the quantity of the real GDP produced in the economy decreases. This reduction in output is due to higher production costs and reduced supply of energy. Increase in unemployment. With a decrease in output, firms produce less, leading to potential layoff and higher unemployment. The lower level of economic activity Q2 compared to Q1 indicate that fewer workers are needed, thus increasing unemployment in the short run. So we're going to question 3. We say, If the European Union Authority would like to solve the inflation problem, what kind of fiscal policy is appropriate for the authority to implement? Explain why. So to solve the inflation problem, they have think of ways that could shift the AD curve, aggregate demand curve to the left. So maybe they can reduce the government spending or to increase the tax. So on this graph, we have the price level on the vertical axis and the quantity of output would really be on the horizontal axis. Initially, the economy faces inflation, with prices rising from P1 to P2 due to the leftward shift of the short-term average supply curve, which is from SRAS1 to the short-term average supply 1 to short-term average supply 2. To tackle the inflation problem, the United European Union authorities need to consider policies that can shift the average demand curve to the left, reducing the overall demand in the economy. Two primary fiscal policies can achieve this. One, reduce government spending. How can we do this? By decreasing the government expenditures, the overall demand in the economy will fall. This reduction in spending shift the aggregate demand curve leftward from AD1 to AD2, leading to a new equilibrium at a lower price level P3. The second way we can do it is increase taxes. Raising taxes on individual and business reduces their disposable income and consumption, thereby lowering overall demand. This policy also shifts the aggregate demand curve from 81 to 82, moving the equilibrium to a lower price level P3. As average demand curve shifts leftward to 82, the price level decreases from P2 to P3, addressing the inflation issue. However, this shift also results in a further reduction in output from Q2 to Q3 and potential increased unemployment in the short run. Now we'll be going to question 4. And it states, if the European Union Authority would like to solve the recession problem, what kind of monetary policy is appropriate for the European Union Authority to implement? Explain why. To solve recession problem, they have to think of ways that could shift the average demand curve to the right. So maybe they can increase this money supply. That's one of the ways we can do it. So the current situation is recession. So the current equilibrium is at P1, Q1, where output Q1, which is Q1, is below the natural rate of output, indicating a recession. The proposed monetary policy is increasing the money supply. So to solve the recession, the European Union Authority can implement an expansionary monetary policy by increasing the money supply. So here's how it would work. One, lower interest rates. Increasing the money supply reduce interest rates. Two, boost spending and investment. Lower interest rate make borrowing cheaper, encouraging both consumer spending and business investment. Three, shift in aggregate demand. This increased spending and investment shift the aggregate demand curve from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2. The desired outcome would be the new aggregate demand curve, AD2, which will be aggregate demand 2, intersect the short-term average supply curve from short-term average supply 1 at a higher output level to Q2. The second one will be this shifts the economy to a new equilibrium point at P2, Q2. The other one will be increasing output. The real GDP increases from Q1 to Q2, moving closer to the natural rate of output, thereby reducing the recession gap. Price level, there may be a slight increase in the price level from P1 to P2, but the main goal is to increase the output. The final question. So the question is, could the European Union Authority use a single policy to simultaneously solve both inflation and recession problems? Explain your answer graphically and descriptively. So, no, they couldn't. One, if they decided to shift the average demand curve to the right, then the recession problem would be solved, but the inflation problem would be worsened. If they decided to shift the aggregate demand curve to the left, then the inflation problem would be solved, but the recession problem would be worsened. So, so the problem is right now we are P1, Q1, which means that we're in a recession. Q1 is less than natural output. At the same time, we have an inflation issue with rising prices. So can one policy fix both? Option one would be shift aggregate demand to the right. How? Increase the money supply. The outcome. This boosts demand moves us out of recession by increasing output, but it raises it prices further, making inflation worse. The option two would be shift aggregate demand to the left. How? Decrease the money supply. The outcome would be this lowers the demand, which helps bring prices down to inflation, but it cuts output even more, worsening the recession. So conclusion. So can the United Nations fix both problems with one policy? No, no. Here's why. The right shift solves the recession but makes the inflation worse. The left shift solves the inflation but deepens the recession. So this is my presentation for question 3. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Emily and today I'm going to be explaining question 4 for the economics final project. So I will explore the concept of liquidity traps, quantitative easing, which I will use the abbreviation QE for, and the specific QE policies adopted by the USA between 2008 and 2014. I will use graphical analysis and historical policy actions to understand these economic concepts. Firstly, section 1. Use a graph of money market to explain why an increase in money supply cannot lower short-term interest rates, suggesting the existence of liquidity trap. Okay, so a liquidity trap occurs when short-term interest rates are at or near zero, rendering conventional monetary policy ineffective. In this situation, even if the central bank increases money supply, as shown by the shift from MS1 to MS2, the interest rate does not decrease further. This is because the demand for money becomes perfectly elastic. People prefer to hold cash instead of bonds due to the low return on bonds. Hence, monetary policy can no longer stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates. Section 2. What is quantitative easing policy? What is the difference between quantitative easing policy and conventional monetary policy? So, quantitative easing, QE, is an unconventional monetary policy used by central banks to stimulate the economy when traditional policies are ineffective. Unlike conventional policy, which adjusts short-term interest rates, QE involves purchasing long-term securities, such as government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. This process increases the money supply and lowers long-term interest rates, encouraging lending and investment. In essence, while conventional policy tweaks the cost of borrowing, QE directly injects liquidity into the financial system to promote economic activity. Section 3. Please introduce the quantitative easing policies adopted by USA between 2008 and 2014. So, like the question reads, we will look at specific QE policies adopted by USA between 2008 and 2014. During this period, the Federal Reserve launched 3 rounds of QE and an additional program called Operation Twist. Firstly, QE1. This started in November 2008 and ended in March 2010. Announced in November 2008, the Federal purchased $600 billion in mortgage-backed securities, MBS, and debt issued by government-sponsored enterprises. The program expanded in March 2009, adding $750 billion in MBS, $100 billion in GSE, and $300 billion in long-term treasury securities. The objectives were to stabilize the financial markets, lower long-term interest rates, and support the housing market. Now, QE2 took place between November 2010 and June 2011. The Fed announced the purchase of $600 billion in long-term treasury securities at a pace of $75 billion per month to further lower long-term interest rates, encouraging borrowing and spending and supporting economic recovery. Now, the program, Operation Twist. This started in September 2011 and ended in December 2012. This involved purchasing $400 billion of long-term treasury securities while simultaneously selling an equal amount of short-term treasury securities. The program was extended in June 2012 at $267 billion, aiming to flatten the yield curve, lower long-term interest rates, and make borrowing cheaper. Lastly, QE3 started in September 2012 and ended in October 2014. Initially announced to purchase $40 billion per month in mortgage-backed securities, QE3 was expanded in December 2012 to include $45 billion per month in long-term treasury securities, totaling $85 billion per month. The goals were to support economic growth and job creation, improve labor market conditions, and maintain low long-term interest rates. Section 4. Explain why the quantitative easing policy could increase aggregate demand. Okay, so quantitative easing can lower aggregate demand and interest rates and increase the money supply, which boosts borrowing spending. As a result, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right, indicating higher demand for goods and services at each price level. Now, use appropriate models to show how the quantitative easing policy would shift to aggregate demand curve and influence output and overall price of the economy. Graphical and descriptive analysis are required. So, the purchasing of bonds through QE makes credit cheaper and more accessible for businesses, individuals, and households. This increase in economy activity leads to business expansion and house purchases. Consequently, the aggregated demand curve shifts from 81 to 82, raising the overall output, which is a real GDP, from Q1 to Q2, and the price level from P1 to P2. Despite potential inflationary pressures, this movement helps the economy reach full employment. So, in summary, we discussed the concept of liquidity trap, the mechanism of quantitative easing, and the specific QE policies implemented by the Federal Reserve between 2008 and 2014. We also explored how QE influences aggregate demand and the broader economy. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Monse, and I will be presenting question number 5. So, question number 5 has 5 parts. The first one is, in the United States, Republican Party follows the principle of supply-side economics, or also called Reagan economics, whereas the Democrat Party follows the principle of demand-side economics, or so-called Keynesian economics. Here we have to explain the difference between supply-side economics and demand-side economics. For the first one, supply-side economics, which is also called Reagan economics, believe markets perform best with minimal government intervention. 2. Demand side, which is also called Keynesian economics, is a belief that there could be disequilibrium and insufficient macroeconomic outcomes, which can be avoided or at least moderated by active economic policy response, monetary policy, and or fiscal policy. Primarily time horizons of analytical vision, long run versus short run. These are some of the differences. Hello, my name is Monse, and I will be presenting question number 5. So for question number 5, the first part consists in the United States Republican Party follows the principles of supply-side economics, whereas the Democrat Party follows the principle of demand-side economics. And here we have to explain the difference between these two types of sides of the economy. The first one would be supply side, which is also called Reagan economics, is a belief that markets perform best with minimal government intervention. The second one is demand side, which is also called Keynesian economics. This is a belief that there could be disequilibrium and inefficient economic outcomes, which can be avoided or at least moderated by active economic policy responses, monetary policy, or fiscal policy. Some of the difference are primarily time horizons of analytical vision, long run versus short run, primary focus of analysis, economic growth versus business cycle and recession, primary concentration of GDP, general trend of GDP versus flung-show of GDP, the emphasized side of economy, supplied side of economy versus demand side of economy, slope of aggregated supply, which is vertical versus upward sloping. Other differences are also basis of theorization, which micro foundations and optimizing agents versus lacking micro foundations and optimizing agents. Other difference is also assumption of money and neutrality. Money neutrality versus no money neutrality. This is, of course, comparing first the supply side economics versus the supply side economics versus the demand side economics. Proposed tools to achieve the economic goals defined. So free market versus public market, policy and government intervention, effect of monetary policy having no real effect versus having real effect in the short run, effect of fiscal policy, no multiplier effect versus multiplier effect, assumptions of prices, fully flexible versus rigid and sticky, assumptions on wages, fully flexible versus rigid and sticky, and Phillips curve, it's a long run versus a short run. For number 5, question 2, by following question 1, here we have to explain why President Trump implemented tax cut policies while President Biden implemented tax increase policies. So, why President Trump Reagan economics implemented tax cut policies? He might believe that reducing tax will stimulate economic growth. Here are the key reasons why Republicans prefer tax cuts. 1. Supply side economics. Lower taxes increase disposable income for individuals and profitable for businesses, leading to more consumption in the economy. Number 2. Incentives for invest and work. Lower taxes improve incentives for individuals to work more and for businesses to invest and expand. These leading to more investment in the economy. Now we have why President Biden, a Keynesian economics, he implemented tax increase policies. He might emphasize the role of the government intervention in managing the economy. Democrats often align with Keynesian principles and prefer tax increases for the following reasons. Number 1, demand side economics. Keynesians believe that aggregated demand drives economy performance. During economic downturns, increasing government spending and sometimes rising taxes on the wealthy can help stimulate demand. Number 2, income distribution. Objective. Democrats often aim to reduce income inequality by increasing taxes on a higher income earners and using the revenue to fund social programs that benefit lower and middle income groups. This redistribution can lead to a more equitable society and ensure that all citizens have access to essential services like healthcare and education. Question number 3 of question 5. As mentioned, the corporate tax rate was reduced to encourage domestic investment. How can this Trump's policy influence the market for loanable fund in U.S.? What happened to real invest rate, next capital outflow, and real exchange rate, and the trade balance in the U.S.? And is here in this question, graphical analysis was also required. So we're going to look first at the first part, and then we're going to look at the graphs. So number 1, demand in the market for loanable funds shifts to the right. Number 2, real interest rate increase. 3, net capital outflow decreases. Number 4, real exchange rate appreciate. And number 5, net export decreases. And now for the graph of part 3 of question 5. As you can see, you could say that demand in the market for loan funds increases. So D1 to D2, as you can see here. So interest rate increases. Because of that, the NCO decreases and the TGE, real exchange rate, rises, which would be E1 to E2, as you can see in the graph here. Next, we have part 4 of question 5. A high tariff was levied on import goods to reduce trade deficit of the USA. How can this Trump's tariff policy influence the market for the foreign currency exchange? What happens to real exchange rate and the trade balance? Here in this question, graphical analysis was also required. So we're going to first see the different breakdowns, and then we're going to see the graph. Number 1, demand in the market for foreign exchange shifts to the right. 2, real exchange rate appreciated. And number 5, trade balance unexchanged. So for the graph of part 4 of question 5, as you can see, a high tariff was levied on imported goods. Initially, the net export increases because import decreased. However, this is also because the real exchange rate to increase, which later decreases the net export. So as a net result, the net export doesn't change. The initial increase in the net export could be explained using the red line in the market for foreign exchange, which would be this graph, which is point D1 to point D2. And the increase in real exchange rate, which is E1 to E2, which is here. Last part of question number 5 says, many economists oppose Trump's tariff policy. They think that Trump's tariff policy could not solve the trade imbalance problem with China. Explain why economists think that way. We thought because even though there was an increase in net export because of the tariffs of imported goods, however, this also caused the real exchange rate to appreciate, which decreased the net export. So as a result, the net export remains unchanged. Thank you very much. This was the last part of question 5.